And so as a speaker and author, what you're trained in doing, it might sound surprising to people, but it is to craft a narrative argument. Like a good speech is a good argument to buy into my thinking, my big idea, my premise, and also my approach, the way I see the world. And if I can do that, if I can influence how you think, it gets a lot easier to influence how you act and how you buy.
Welcome to the Agents of Change, the podcast experience you've been waiting for your entire marketing career. Search, social, mobile, AI, blockchain, and neuromarketing. These are the Agents of Change, and so are you. Digital marketing success awaits, and your transformation begins now.
Welcome to another episode of the Agents of Change podcast. I'm your host, Rich Brooks. This is episode 604, powered by Flight New Media. Flight, as you may know, is my day job. Running a digital agency that's been in business for over 28 years. And for over 28 years, we've been working with businesses and organizations just like yours, creating memorable brands, building high-converting websites, and developing marketing campaigns that drive traffic, interest, and leads. If that sounds like what you've been missing out on, reach out to us today. Either visit takeflight.com, that's F-L-Y-T-E, or go to theagentsofchange.com and fill out the contact form, and I'll be sure to get back to you myself. I met today's guest at an impromptu dinner at this year's CEX event. We didn't get much of a chance to talk that night, but he seemed like a good guy. The next day, he took the stage and absolutely blew me away with a presentation about presentations. It got me rethinking my own style of presenting, and as I chatted with him afterward, I realized that his message wasn't just apropos for speaking. It was valuable advice for any content that you're creating. So I asked him to join me on the podcast. So let's dive in. My next guest helps experts become stronger public voices. He began his career in marketing roles at Google and ESPN and worked as head of content at HubSpot and a venture capital firm before earning a living from stages as a keynote speaker and show host. Today, he's a consultant trusted by executives, entrepreneurs, and brands like MailChimp, Salesforce, and Wistia to turn their thinking into IP and their advice into memorable speeches and stories that move the market. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can develop your own premise and differentiating yourself by your perspective with Jay Acunzo. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Rich, good to speak to you.
So I guess my first question is, how do you manage that 3-day shave look that you've mastered every time I see you? It's the perfect just length. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, well, some stereotypes are true. I'm Italian, which anybody who can watch me speak can tell by the everything of me. It's hands, hair gel, facial hair. So it's like the 3 H's of my Italianness. So this is practice, my friend. That's the only way I can answer that question. It takes great care and great practice to have facial hair this bad.
I'm going to try harder to get my facial hair to look like yours. All right. So shifting to unimportant things, how did you first get started in helping people with their presentations and their storytelling?
Unexpectedly, I after my stint in tech, I became my own independent man, in a way, my own independent entrepreneur in 2016. And I took a weird route there because I think a lot of people, they start selling services, they build a firm, they build a personal brand, they get the book out in market, then they consider possibly pursuing a speaker fee and they become a paid public speaker. I started there, and through lots of great mentors and hard work and a lot of luck and a weird self-delusion that has served me well, that I think all entrepreneurs understand when you speak about that, or business owners or any creatives really. I started as a paid professional keynote speaker, traveling this country and several others, giving speeches, sometimes to thousands of people, sometimes to a dozen and everyone in between, across different subsectors of the business world before I had a book. And by the way, still waiting on the fame part. So I don't, no book, no fame. You're able to do it because what I was taught was the speech and all the IP bottled up in the speech, your big idea, your premise, your stories, your methodology, your frameworks, terminology you define, kind of all the ways you package and communicate your expertise to resonate. And a speech is just a dense dose of that. It's that stuff that creates a flywheel of inquiries, both to, hire you for a service, although for a time I didn't sell anything but speeches, and also to invite you to keep speaking. So I was able to create this flywheel of what they call stage side leads as a professional keynote speaker. And I'm not alone. There's lots of people who have done that. But in the pandemic, of course, I got punched in the mouth and I thought I would wean off of the road and build up a services arm eventually because we were looking at having baby number 2. And while I like to travel, I was staring at something like friends of ours, like a Jay Bear or an Andrew Davis or others who spend 200 plus days on the road. That was never going to be for me. I was doing about 30 gigs a year. And I knew I need to figure out what is the second business unit that could eventually become the first and prime one. And of course, the pandemic was a reality where there was no weaning to be had. And so I kind of lurched around for a couple of years until I realized I had this kind of crystallizing moment where a CMO friend of mine who gives speeches all over the marketing industry came rushing up to me at the end of, I think it was 2022, maybe beginning of 23. And he was like, "Oh my God, Jay, I know you're a good speaker. I've never seen you speak. Can you give my talk later in the day?" And I kind of went, "Oh, right. We should all be asking ourselves, what are the most impressive people in our networks most impressed by coming from us?" Because to me, that's premium clientele. That's fulfillment creatively for me. That's a need others have. And I wasn't seeing myself clearly until a couple years after the pandemic began, where I moved behind the scenes. And I joke, I'm trying to be like the Rick Rubin for business storytellers. Like I want to be that peer level advisor where I work with folks on turning their expertise into IP, that kind of commercialized version of their advice, and then turning them as teachers and experts into much more powerful speakers and storytellers.
It's just kind of funny because at the beginning of the sentence, beginning of the answer, when you started talking about you're not, fame has yet to come, I noticed when we were at CEX together, how many people name checked you from stage, both before you spoke and then after you spoke. I know I did, only to kind of preface the fact that I was going to basically not do any of the suggested things that you had done because I already come up with my presentation at that point. But I needed to address that. But then you mentioned like you were within this area, within this group of people who do presentations. You do have a certain level of fame. I mean, people know who you are, they respect you, and they talk about you. And that usually comes from seeing game. Like people who are good at what they do and they see your level of expertise here. A big reason why I wanted you to come on the show, even though we're not talking about digital marketing specifically, although obviously there's a lot of overflow or Venn diagram. Speaking of which, so my next question was going to be about talk to me a little bit about the difference between creating intellectual property, IP, versus just creating content.
Yeah, I think there was a time I helped contribute to this vibe because as head of content at HubSpot, they were kind of tips and tricks are us when I joined that company. And there's no secret I didn't last long there. I sort of failed my team in trying to push that organization into a deeper, higher quality, less volume-based approach. Did not succeed there. But back in that era where HubSpot and other organizations were urging marketers and business owners to create a lot of content, it was enough perhaps to say, well, I know something and I'm going to share what I know for free through content. That was like a radical idea at one point. And now you look around and expertise, I'm not talking about like nuclear reactor expertise or medical expertise. There's things that should be taken seriously and should only come from an expert. But even then, there's a lot of voices sharing content publicly. Expertise has been commodified. Like it's valuable, but I can get it anywhere. And the last thing you want to do is raise your hand and say, well, I guess I'm anywhere. And like put me on a spreadsheet with all my competitors and the winning pick is lowest price. Like that's not a way to build a business. And so as a speaker and author, what you're trained in doing, it might sound surprising to people, but it is to craft a narrative argument. Like a good speech is a good argument to buy into my thinking, my big idea, my premise, and also my approach, the way I see the world. And if I can do that, if I can influence how you think, it gets a lot easier to influence how you act and how you buy. And a lot of marketers or owners are much more stuck on, I got to influence how they buy. Maybe a little bit got to influence how they act, because if they're trying to do that thing, they might hire me for my service or product, right? And I'm looking at all these people and I'm like, you have such deep expertise and you just keep sprinting on the hamster wheel, sharing generic advice just like everybody else. And some folks are now resorting to all these stunts and gimmicks online, which I think devalues you, where you like shove more volume of content at the world, or you lace your content with sensationalism and clickbait and all that. I think that serious buyers are repelled by that. Serious clients are repelled by that. You're anchoring yourself to basically being a louder commodity. It's like a brighter shade of beige. Or you're like writing in the sky with a drone show. I'm just like the rest. It's like the drone show's not the point. It's the underlying substance and message. And there's a craft, there's a skill. It doesn't require you quitting your job and being a speaker full time to go from talking topics to owning a singular premise, to go from sharing a wall of smarts to having like a succinct and logical argument that does the only job I think we're supposed to do with the world when we communicate, which is not reach people, but resonate with them. And so since learning that, I've been on this really like exciting path, I think, but also maybe a little countercultural to the era of the internet we're in, to help people resonate deeper, because then you either don't have to think about the reach part or the reach part gets easy, but it's all about resonance.
All right, let's dig a little bit deeper on that, because I think a lot of people, a lot of our listeners are used to creating content,
Sure.
and maybe they have a unique perspective or not. So walk me through that process. Like if you're working with a client or providing advice, what are some of the ways where we get off that hamster wheel of creating content, creating how-to content? Because we like sharing ideas and we want to prove our expertise, but there's something missing. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. And maybe what you're so good at is there is a missing piece here that basically transforms content. Because you're right, I can ask ChatGPT, I can ask Google, I can ask any expert and get an answer on whatever subject I'm interested in.
Yep.
But what we're here talking about is that we're creating something that really helps. It's a premise, it's a perspective. So what is that shift in mindset that we need to go through? Or what advice do you give so that we can claim a piece of land as our own?
I like to joke with clients. So I'm a whiskey drinker. My early interactions with clients is what I call the 2-drink minimum version of you, where I don't want to hear you try to wordsmith or come up with a tagline or come up with anything particularly tight or public facing. All I want is brutal honesty about how you see your space. Because everyone out there is talking about the same topic that you are. That's not differentiating. There's something about your perspective that is. And we just take that for granted. And you have for years. We're like, yeah, I know myself or my team or my organization. Like, we are different. We are special. And the problem is I'd need an hour or two over coffee or drinks to really understand that. I'd walk away getting it because I'd have to discover it. Well, how do you make what's normally discovered readily apparent? I actually think it starts by turning deeper inward to yourself as the individual voice and figuring out, what in the hell am I really trying to say to the world? How do I actually hear or say what I've been trying to say, frankly, through my content, through my messaging, in my public thought leadership, everywhere I go, one-on-one or one-to-many or everything in between? I haven't tried to put good raw material out on the table to synthesize into something good later. So I mentioned Rick Rubin before. He's this like kind of famous name in music. His job is to be a peer of artists and extract from them, not impose on them. And that's the role I play, where I'm saying, okay, Rich, you've been talking about this space for a while. You're surrounded by a lot of people who also talk about that space. Let's come up with an argument for why somebody should care about the way you see it. And like as a speaker, you learn that that's actually the operating system of your keynotes, is a good narrative argument where you kind of anticipate what is it the audience is asking? And then how do I respond with that? Then they have a follow-up question. How do I respond with that? It's like a lawyer saying, if we agree to this, then logically this. If we agree to that, then logically that. And you move them from where they're at to where you want them to be. And so the result of this is you could pitch your perspective with something I call the XY premise pitch. It's like, this is a service, this is a business, a product, even this is a podcast, this is a speech about X. That's your topic. Unlike those things about X, only we, Y. And people really struggle with the differentiator. Only we what? If you're a podcaster, you're like, only we get to the actual practical advice. No. For me, I have a show called How Stories Happen. It's a show about storytelling. Unlike other shows about storytelling, only I make the assertion that you don't experience stories, you have to craft them. You experience your life, you craft stories bit by tiny bit. So on the show, we ask amazing storytellers like Seth Godin and up-and-coming voices you've never heard of and everybody in between to deconstruct a single story and how it came together. Because that's a better look at the craft of storytelling than a generic interview with a luminary voice, right? And so we make assertions all the time, But what you need is a real narrative argument behind your perspective. And you can tease out your premise by constructing a good argument. And there's myriad ways to do this, and I can get into that. But that's the first starting point, is be brutally honest with what are you arguing for? What are you asking them to do differently? How do you really see it? Because that's actually why they care. And we mostly don't get in touch with that.
How do we know they care? Or is that an assumption that we have to make?
I do think there's a little bit of an overemphasis or unnecessary amount of value that we place in business on the market's response to something, or more likely, like what would they respond positively to? I'll say that. What's the best practice on that channel? I'll show up like that. And that's hard because even though you're like, well, if I just know, I can say it, so is everyone else. Anyone can do it or say it that way. So it's hard because now you're on the hamster wheel racing faster than the million competitors who sound like you. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what I call inside out thinkers, where they're like, well, how do I see it? What do I uniquely have to say? And it's hard to articulate what you uniquely have to say, but also it's hard to figure out how to get them to arrive at the same conclusion. You need good IP, you need good frameworks and stories and ways of saying things and memorable phrases and like the thought leaders that we admire, right? And so it's hard either way. It's hard to be a commodity. It's hard to be a leader. I would rather be a leader because it's very defensible and you can charge a premium. And also people tend to seek you out. You don't have to chase attention as much. And I think that's really the benefit of all this stuff we're talking about, Rich, is like, can we stop chasing attention and become the one others seek? Because ultimately, wouldn't that be better? And so I think like what we need to start measuring, you asked about how to tell if you're connecting and if others care, is not what they're already talking about or searching for, but I have now put in front of you my strongest way of articulating this. Did I compel a response? So I made up a metric for this. I'm glad you asked, because in marketing, you need an acronym to be taken seriously. So the metric is this: URR, unsolicited response rate. Without gaming the system or asking for a reply, do my ideas compel a response? Because otherwise, how the hell do you know that people care? Or that you should keep promoting that content or invest in that message and stake your business reputation to it, right? If I put this in front of you, do you respond? And you can actually score this. Like all the way on the low end, you get 0 points for no response. And on the high end, you get 6 points for people responding with their own personal stories because they've invested the most time and reputation that they will invest to respond to something, right? So I've worked with clients to say, we need to put your ideas out there and then see if they compel a response, because that's what's worth investing in and distributing everywhere. How do we measure that response? Without asking for it, did they respond? Unsolicited. And then how do you measure it? Well, you can actually score it based on the type of response. You get more points for how much time and reputation your audience invested in responding to you. And for some reason, Rich, I don't know why, we think that the only metrics worth measuring when we speak publicly is the stuff the platforms give us. But they have an advertising business model. They don't measure resonance because they don't frankly give a shit about resonance. They care all about reach because they monetize reach. We need to care about resonance because that's why people take action. That's why we drive a sale or new clients or subscribers. And so we have to get more creative in how we measure it.
So, I know we've seen movies about comedians and they take it on the road and they work through their material.
Yeah.
Are you recommending that we go out and actually do presentations where it's okay if we fail? Or are you talking more about taking some of these ideas, these original IP, putting them out onto, say, social media or even a discussion table, whatever it may be, and seeing what that URR is?
I came up in the speaking world under the tutelage of the great Andrew Davis, who I think is one of, if not the best marketing speaker alive today, Andrew Davis. And what he taught me was the power of this one word, aerate. You have to aerate your thinking publicly to sharpen it. First of all, you get a feedback loop in your own brain. Forcing yourself to communicate in any medium makes you better at communicating it. My book in 2018, Break the Wheel, was about questioning best practices and thinking for yourself in the era of advice. And when I wrote Break the Wheel, I thought, this is me cementing my strongest way of saying this into a book forever. But then I promoted the book for 6 to 9 months on podcasts. And by the end of that tour, I was like, oh no, I say it way better now than in the book. Because the more you force yourself to show up in front of an audience and communicate, first you get a feedback loop to yourself about how to improve your own thinking and internalize that thinking and say it effortlessly. And second, you do get a feedback loop in front of others. So I always advocate that people start this process by selecting a channel or project that represents your aeration practice, where like every Friday, I'm going to send a newsletter. And yeah, I'd like that newsletter to drive some clients my way, but mostly I'm going to write that even if 0 people subscribed. Why? Because it's for me. It's a development tool. It's an aeration tool. I need to create so I improve how I say it myself. And then I worry about creating so others give me a response. And a lot of us aren't willing to do that. A lot of us think content is distribution. Content is also learning. Writing is thinking. And, ding, 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 I'm going to say AI now. You get all the points because you're listening to a marketing podcast where someone says AI. I think when people approach AI, like, I can skip the messy process. I'm like, good luck. You're skipping the process where you yourself tightened your thinking and discovered better ways of thinking and improved. If you want to be that influential voice someday that people run to and pay money for, and good money at that, whether you sell a service or a product or a speech, that's a mistake. So you need to do the comedian thing. I agree. Show up in small pockets of your audience and put your thinking in front of them, and then step back and go, how do I improve it next time out?
I remember years ago watching these high experts in Madden football, and they were talking about how they got, how did you get to the top of the game?
Yeah.
And one of the guys just said, you got to spend time in the lab. And he just meant he plays the game 12 hours a day. Now, this was for a $50,000 prize. So, I'm sure it was fun. I also don't know about the ROI. But, moving on from that topic.
Well, no, here, I'm going to say a name that maybe makes you hate me. Can I do that? Derek Jeter. I'm assuming you're a Red Sox fan?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, I don't hate Derek Jeter. He's one of the few. Now, if you had said A-Rod, this interview would have been over.
Oh, that's
but
fair.
Jeter,
that's fair. I'm a Yankees
when he
fan,
dove into the audience when Nomar was sitting on the bench for us, that changed my perspective of both players. Anyways,
there you go. So Derek Jeter, I was listening to an episode of a podcast that he did recently as a guest, and he talked about the value of preparation. And he was talking about preparing to play baseball. And he was talking about it in a very matter-of-fact way, as if there is no other way to be excellent than to prepare. And I'm like, of course. Why don't we think of that when we are professional communicators? Why do we think we can hire an agency or hire a consultant like me, or in our own internal sense, like come up with like the best story about our brand in theory, press it into a deck, not show it to anybody, and then take it to market in this big announcement fashion or distribute it on all platforms, on our website, in a speech, before we've ever put those words in front of anybody? Like we want to be excellent. We very rarely prepare for excellence. And to me, when you're a professional communicator, you got to take the Jerry Seinfeld approach. His book is called Is This Anything? That's kind of what you're doing. You're putting your work out to the world, and you can do it privately with trusted colleagues or friends. You could do it with a small pocket of your audience. I think it's a mistake to do it everywhere all at once, but you say basically to the world, you're implying, is this anything? Like what drives me up a wall is every single human being in business. I don't care what your role is, what you sell, how long you've done it, how good or bad you see yourself as a storyteller. Every single individual wants to resonate with the person on the receiving end. But the person on the receiving end is asking the same thing, or really commanding the same thing when you show up to communicate. Make me care. And we haven't proven ourselves to be able to say this in such a way that does. Like what matters, but what you say and how you say it is going to determine if they care. And we haven't figured out if our words do that, if our message does that, if our speech, if our story, if our content does that. We just expect it to. And when it doesn't, and this breaks my heart most of all, what do? We promote it more. We're like waltzing the earth going, oh, it must be a reach problem. I'm like, you reach people now. There's 5 people who got in front of you or you got in front of. They didn't respond at all. Why is your response like, the people who already like me signaled they didn't like this. I should go put this in front of more people. Like that makes no sense. We think we have a reach problem, but we typically have a resonance problem. And both of these things have metrics, have process, have craft, have technique. But we look at the resonance stuff of our favorite voices who resonate and we're like, I could never do that. No, this is a skill. This is a craft. We should be mastering it because all the other stuff is going away. It's not differentiating. We can't own it.
I feel like we could go deeper, hours deeper into everything we've talked about so far, about developing your perspective, about the practice. But I do want to touch on a couple other things before I let you go today.
Sure.
And what is kind of the shape of a presentation? And you and I talked about this because I may not be at your level, but I love giving public presentations and I do it as much as I can.
You're
And
damn good at it, by the way.
told you, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that I think I told you is if I'm driving like an hour to a presentation, I don't listen to music or any podcast on the way up. I literally practice the first 5 minutes so it rolls off my tongue as naturally as possible.
Amen.
I know you have some strong feelings about finishing
Yes.
and ending together, but talk to me a little bit about how you focus on the structure of a presentation, whether it's a TED Talk or a 45-minute presentation.
So picture it like a barbell, right? You got the bar in the middle, but on either end, you have these big plates. Like most of the weight is on the ends, right? Same with a speech. Studies about memory and recall suggest that people will remember the first and latest moments with any experience or person. It's called the primacy and recency effects, first and latest. And that means in a presentation of any kind, in an episode, in an article, it doesn't matter. It's just very noticeable. And I think a mistake we make in speeches, if we want to be remembered well, or even just remembered in a specific way at all, then what we need to be really over obsessing about and over investing in other words, our best material needs to be in the first and last moments. And what do you get from most business communicators and speakers? Really bad openers and closers. They don't even use those terms, by the way. They just kind of meekly start. They make all kinds of mistakes with verbal debris and filler words and meandering to the start. They talk about what they want to talk about. They don't do anything at all to start well, to start memorably. And then they kind of like drop the momentum, if they had any, at the very end with a call to action or kind of a meandering, well, thanks, that's my time, any questions? And actually what we need to do is create a signature opener and a signature closer. And then there's two pieces to the bar in the middle. There's the how to think material, followed by the how to material. And a lot of experts just shove a wall of smarts at people. It doesn't have those four elements. Or they think, well, the how to think is a keynote, which is true. And the how to is a breakout, and I'm a breakout. Well, no, you still need to align around how to see something, how to think. And if you're a keynote, you still have to impart practical, tangible takeaways and frameworks and methods. So it's the opener, how to think, how to, the closer. And so see it like a barbell, where the most important, counterintuitively, is how you start and how you end.
Now, there are a lot of speaking coaches out there, Jay, a lot of advice floating around there. What's one piece of advice that you think is absolute trash? Or what's one thing that you believe in that you don't see a lot of other speaking coaches focus on?
That's a good question. I certainly have a different perspective than a lot of speaking coaches, I think, because you can be a wonderful teacher and not have done the thing you're teaching. I can't disparage that. Like teaching itself is a skill. But I built myself a speaking business. And so like, I know what it feels like when the audience isn't responding. I know what it feels like to walk out to 4,000 people, like to travel, to pitch yourself, to kind of go through the ringer and fail and succeed. And so I bring a slightly different lens to that. I think a lot of people, they put an emphasis on kind of two extremes. One is you need to just do everything in your power to build more online fame, and invitations to speak happen. And I think that's total BS. And on the other extreme, it's you kind of have to have this soft shoe, tap dance, jazz hands approach to speaking. You have to know the theatrics of it all. But I actually think there's something that people miss, which is it's the same with what we're doing now, Rich, but it's really noticeable on a stage. People talk about being authentic, and I'm like, yeah, kind of. But I'm performing when I'm on stage. I'm performing now. I'm performing when I write to you. I'm performing when I'm on a one-on-one call with a client. We're performing at all times. The trick is to know how to deploy a version of you on the stage that actually grips people and delivers a message that is on premise and on brand and sparks action. Like, that's a lot. The stakes are really, really high. And so I think a lot of people are on the technique level when I want to stay on the person level. I want to work on the person up there, where it's like, it's not actually your big emotional gestures or where you stand or how you move. It's not actually whether or not you have a big following. Back to Seinfeld, he says, I get 5 minutes to just be Seinfeld, but then I have to deliver on stage. Like, you're kind of laid bare up there or virtually if you're not doing travel-based speaking. And so what I feel like people miss is you can get process from anybody. Techniques, all the stuff I'm talking about is like, it's not that. That's process. but you need practice and posture. Like those 3 P's are craft, process, practice, and posture. And when you don't have the posture of like, I am going to challenge people's thinking, I am going to try to create an argument that changes how they approach this forever. When you don't have the posture of like, I can do this, or I'm the baddest mofo in this room, or whatever, it's going to be hard. And if you don't have the practice of putting out your thinking to improve, or firing up a webcam, or going on a walk and kind of shooting video just to practice using your voice, if you're not practicing, if you think the first and only time you're doing it is the best time you're doing it, it's going to be harder too. So I guess the sum up of that is like a lot of people try to shove their process at you. I think whether it's me or someone else, I think the best consultants and advisors, they're going to try and figure out, how do I improve your posture and how do I give you a sustainable practice? Because those 2 things have to come from you and the rest can be handed to you, which means it's not differentiating.
Awesome. And probably the perfect place to end. So Jay, if people want to learn more about you and how you can help them, where can we send them online?
So I host a podcast where I kind of workshop material with other business communicators. Maybe they speak, maybe they're thinking about their message, maybe they write. That's called How Stories Happen. And so you can get that wherever you listen to podcasts. And my site is jayacunzo.com, where you can learn more, subscribe to my newsletter, hear a little bit more about what clients say about working with me, and also see me in action. I publish a lot of coaching calls with permission publicly, where you can see me actually go through the process of developing a message or a speech with a client.
Awesome. Jay, this has been fantastic. Whether you're on stage or behind the mic, it's just great content and great perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich.
Lots of great content from Jay, lots of great ideas. Definitely something that I would like to listen again to, and maybe you would too. If you're interested in getting more out of today's episode, head on over to theagentsofchange.com/604. You'll find the audio, you'll find the transcript, you'll find a blog post, you'll find show notes, you'll find all the links that Jay shared with us. And, if you really want to take your speaking to the next level, reach out to Jay, because I'm sure he can help you get there. I loved seeing Jay present, and it was a great opportunity to get him on the podcast so I could pepper him with questions that will likely influence my presentations and the content creation I do moving forward. Hey, do you know somebody who's doing public speaking or that wants to? Do them a favor and send them a link to this week's episode. It'll show that you care and that you're rooting for them. Whether you're up there on stage, creating TikTok videos, or crafting blog posts for your website, it's imperative that you develop your own voice and your own premise, a premise worth defending. Craft it until it resonates and become the voice people seek out, not tune out. And that's how you become an agent of change.
Don't miss another thrilling episode of the Agents of Change podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform.